So thank you, Dr. Barghouti, for sitting with me here today. The honor and privilege is mine.
Thank you.
I'm hoping we could just cover a few things, your early life in Palestine and how that connects with your activism, your very important transformative political work, and the idea of resistance and how that might tie into humanitarian relief. So I'm wondering first if we can talk about your early life. As I mentioned, you were born not very long after the Nakba. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what that was like for you growing up in Palestine at that time.
Well, I was born exactly 6 years after the Nakba. So I didn't live the Nakba. But the situation in Palestine and the issue of Palestinian freedom was all the time in our heads, in our life. I grew up in a family that was politically very active. And they were very active during the British mandatory time. They were very active during Jordanian time and, of course, during the time of occupation. But if I want to be precise, I think the very important moment in the maturity of my political, or beginning of the maturity of my political awareness, was the 1967 war, the Israeli occupation. I was born in Jerusalem. I grew up in Ramallah. And in 1967, we were occupied by Israel. I was still young then. A young boy, but like most of the people of my generation and the generation older, we had this thinking that somebody will come and help us. Somebody will come and liberate Palestine and bring the refugees back to their homes they were displaced from in the first Nakba in 1948. And to our great surprise, during 67 war, 3 Arab major armies were defeated by Israel in a few days. And when you compare now, by the way, the Israeli losses in fighting a small resistance group, relatively speaking, for a whole year, you compare their losses now with that in 1967, you get surprised that their losses in 1967 defeating 3 Arab armies was much less than what they have now in fighting only with a small resistance movement. Which means there wasn't really a fight in 1967. And in my opinion, I was very young. I was only 13 years old. But I felt that the whole responsibility of the world fell on my shoulders. Like, I think the whole generation of Palestinians then, we had the strong feeling that we have to depend on ourselves. And I remember during the first days of the war, I was anyhow a volunteer in the Scouts. And then they called on us to come and help because there were many injuries and we needed to provide first aid. So I immediately volunteered and left home and joined the civil defense groups, if you can call it so. And then a doctor came and gave us training for 2 hours about how to do first aid. And then we were out in the field, which was bombarded by Israeli airplanes, by Israeli artillery. And for the first time, I saw people injured, bleeding. For the first time, I saw people dying. And maybe that what happened that these days made me want to become a medical doctor. And maybe it had an influence on me to start a very powerful now and important Palestinian health organization called Palestinian Medical Relief Society. And maybe that also instigated what we do now, which is training thousands and thousands of young people in first aid. But the main impact, in my opinion, in 1967 was this feeling that we cannot wait for others to help us. We have to be self-reliant, we have to be self-organized, and we have to defy the Israeli occupation. And that's exactly what happened in the first Intifada.
Well, I'm wondering, it's interesting you mentioned that because now, as you see, there's growing international solidarity with the Palestinian people. But at that time, would you say it was specifically Palestinian people being self-reliant without any connection to the outside world? Or when did you notice there was a connection, a global movement for Palestine?
In the first Intifada. Before that, unfortunately, I must say the Europeans were in solidarity with Israel, not with Palestinians. And Israel was perceived as a heroic country that defeated Arab armies. And it was so much of the image of the courageous David defeating the Arab Goliath.
Yes.
But in the first Intifada, which started in 1987, basically, and before that, there were many actual popular resistance activities from 1967 to 87. It wasn't like a calm time. I mean, there were lots of demonstrations, lots of uprisings, lots of struggle in so many different ways, in which I was participant, of course. But the Intifada, the first Intifada, reversed the picture. Suddenly, the world started to see that the Israeli army is nothing but an occupying, oppressive army that is breaking the bones of Palestinian civil resistance, and that is attacking young boys who were just demonstrating, and then arresting thousands and thousands of them, and then literally breaking their bones, according to the instructions of the Israeli defense minister at the time, Yitzhak Rabin. And suddenly it was the real picture. It's Palestinian David defying the Israeli mighty Goliath, which is the Israeli occupation. I think the 80s show, well, in the 70s there was the beginning of strong solidarity, but the 80s has seen the peak up of this solidarity with Palestinian people.
I mean, do you feel there was, during the first Intifada, a particular philosophical or political ideology that was underlying much of the thinking of the leadership or the people who were at the forefront of the movement?
The first Intifada would not have succeeded or would not have happened if it wasn't for a very powerful Palestinian civil society. And it would not have happened if it wasn't for the fact that generations of new Palestinians who were oppressed by the Israeli occupation, so that there is no way of accepting this life of continuous oppression, arrests, discrimination, etc., without revolting against it. But I think the three main principles that moved the Intifada was what I told you before: self-organization, self-reliance, and defying the Israeli measures. Maybe an additional factor pushed the people in the occupied Palestine, inside Palestine, to the self-reliance and the beginning of this fantastic popular resistance, which was the fact that the Israeli army managed to attack the PLO in Lebanon in 1982, and then forced the PLO out of Lebanon and divided its people into groups in Yemen, in Iraq, in Libya, and in Tunisia, you know. So maybe this was also a contributing factor, that the main area of struggle is the internal Palestinian, the inside Palestine. That's where the struggle is going to be happening mainly. In Gaza, in West Bank, in Jerusalem, but also in 1948 areas.
Yes. I mean, to your credit, you've done so much in terms of grassroots activism at the state level, the political level, the diplomatic level. So I'm wondering if you can give us any insight in terms of how things differ when politics is done at the grassroots level, Palestinian solidarity is done at the grassroots level versus when it's done at, say, the governmental or state level, and maybe what the advantages and disadvantages are.
Well, you need both, but the grassroots work is the most important one. because we are a national liberation movement. We are not a government. One of the flaws of the Oslo Agreement is that it tried to transform the national liberation movement into just an authority structure. That's not true, because we are still under occupation, and the authority is under occupation. We haven't achieved independence, and now we can say that we are not a liberation movement anymore. And some of the major mistakes that PLO did was to think that they could absorb the national liberation movement into a Palestinian authority, which is so much strangled and regulated and controlled by the Israeli occupation. So our grassroots work was very important from three perspectives. First of all, grassroots work is the way to organize people. Second, grassroots work is the way to strengthen the ability of the Palestinian people to empower the Palestinian community and society to be able to stand up to the Israeli oppression and to survive, to help people stay in Palestine. Because in our struggle with the Zionist movement and the Israeli government being nothing but a settler colonial imperialist system that is trying to replace us with Jewish immigrants from outside, to kick us out of our country, to conduct ethnic cleansing. So grassroots work is so essential to help people stay in Palestine. And that's the most crucial factor. But third, grassroots work with other countries is very crucial in building a solidarity movement with Palestine. Many governments are delayed in their response and solidarity. Many governments are influenced by Israel. Many governments still have racist approach, and they don't want to see us as equal human beings. So starting powerful grassroots pressure from below on these governments to change their positions was very essential. So grassroots politics is very important for me. But maybe the difference in my case, while some people are only doing grassroots politics and some others do state politics, I do both. And I think that's a very, very important combination. It augments the effect, as a matter of fact. I meet with state people. I try to pressure as much as I can for more solidarity with Palestine. And when I notice their resistance, I go to the grassroots. And I continue the work with the grassroots to exercise pressure. Some people don't understand that because they don't realize how democratic system works in some countries. Some people in autocratic countries, authoritarian systems, don't feel that the opinion of the people matters. While in a democratic system, it does matter. And it can change government policies. That's what Israel understood very well. And that's why they built so many lobbies in the United States and in European countries and so on.
Yes. Actually, I wanted to ask you about Oslo, and you mentioned it just now. I'm wondering if the Palestinian people knew from the outset, when there was talk about these accords coming into being, that this would disadvantage them, or was that something that they learned after they were signed? Or
we understood it was wrong from the very beginning. And I mean by we, the people who were in the official Palestinian negotiating team, like Haidar Abd al-Shafi and others like myself. We were insisting that we will not accept an interim deal, a transitional arrangement, without knowing the end result. We were insisting that first the end result has to be approved, which is end of occupation, completely. Removal of settlements, completely. Application of international law. The problem with Oslo is that it was done from behind the back of the official negotiating team, and practically from behind the back of the Palestinian people, because it was secret talks. And the problem with that was that the agreement that was signed had many major flaws. First of all, it did not insist, as we demanded, that there will be complete and total block of all settlement activities. Israel abused that. So we had 120,000 settlers when Oslo Agreement was signed. Now there are 750,000. Second point, the PLO recognized Israel as a state and the right of Israel, of Israel to be a state, while Israel did not recognize Palestinian state. They only recognized the PLO as a representative of Palestinian people. Third, it was an interim agreement without identifying the end result. And because of that, Israel used this transitional period not to progress, and then eventually to regress. Israel pushed us back. So all temporary arrangements were cancelled one after the other by the Israeli establishment. And of course, one major flaw was that the Oslo agreements were done without consultation with the people. But in '93, when they were signed, many people believed in them. Yes. And I remember it was difficult in the beginning for us to explain that Oslo agreement was not exactly what Palestinians need. And but it took only a year, and then people discovered all the flaws and started to agree with us with what we say. And as a matter of fact, the people, many of the leaders who opposed Oslo agreement at the time, became the founders of the movement that I represent today, the Palestinian National Initiative, like Dr. Haidar Abd al-Shafi, Ibrahim Daqqaq, the very, very well-known author Edward Said, and others.
Yes. I mean, do you feel that there were certain countries, particularly in the West, who were referencing the Oslo Accords for years after they were signed as a way to kind of buy time, as a way to kind of say that, you know.
Not buy time, give Israel time. Practically, give Israel time to finish the job. And finish the job means finishing the Judaization and settlement building and annexation of Palestinian land. And that's why I say to any country that claims to support the two-state solution, I say what you do is not, we cannot believe that you support a Palestinian statehood unless you demand, while you call for two-state solution, you should demand end of Israeli occupation completely. Removal of all Israeli legal settlements in the West Bank and Jerusalem, as the International Court of Justice just concluded, and recognize Palestine. If a country says they support two-state solution and they recognize only Israel, I don't believe them. So any country that doesn't say these three things or do these three things and talk about two-state solution is nothing but a country that is practicing hypocrisy and is using hypocrisy to give Israel time to finish the process of land appropriation and maybe ethnic cleansing of Palestinians.
Yes, it's quite astonishing, because it just gives me pause to think about the Canadian narrative. For so long, there was talk about this two-state solution.
It's very simple. A student in a school student will ask the question, if you say two states, why you recognize one and not the other? Why you say that we, the Palestinians, have to have Israeli acceptance of our state?
Yes.
And it has to be done through negotiations with the Israeli side. When the Israeli side is declaring by its parliament, both by the governing parties and the opposition parties together, they declare no place for a Palestinian state. How can you expect me to wait and negotiate with them about creating something they reject?
Yes.
Without external pressure on Israel, there will not be a state, a Palestinian state, or the so-called two-state solution. Without external pressure, Israel must be treated as a pariah structure, a pariah state, as a rogue state. It should be treated exactly like the racist apartheid system was treated in South Africa. In South Africa, apartheid continued till there was boycott, divestment, sanctions from the world that forced that regime to stop. And by the way, one of the flaws of Oslo Agreement is that when we did the intifada, the first intifada, we changed the balance of power between us and the occupation. Israel could not anymore continue the occupation in the same manner. And that's why for Israel, the Oslo Agreement was a way of diffusing the outcome of the intifada. And in my opinion, had the PLO leadership at the time followed our path of what we were proposing, maybe we would have had a Palestinian state. But the change of the power balance was lost because of Oslo Agreement. It divided Palestinians, and it created a rift between Palestinians inside and outside. And it caused many, many problems.
Was any of the Palestinian Authority, like at one time, on the side of the people, and then when Oslo came, they betrayed the people? Or how did that?
I would not use the word betray. No, I don't agree with that kind of description. But I would say leaving the arena of struggle.
Okay. Yes.
I wrote a book after Oslo. The name of the book was Staying on the Mountain. You know, because in Islamic history and in Arab history, there is the famous case of Prophet Muhammad fighting his enemies in a fight, in a battle called Uhud battle. And during the fight, Prophet Muhammad advised his people not to come down from the top of the mountain at that time, which was controlling the area of the battle. But during the fight, it looked like that his enemies were defeated. So those on top of the mountain defied his instructions and came down. And when they came down, the other side went up and took over. And so they lost the battle because of this. And that's how I describe Oslo. Some people in the PLO leadership left their positions of national liberation struggle too early, thinking we've reached an end point, while we were not actually. We were still far away from it. And I think they didn't understand the nature of the Israeli Zionist movement.
So they were kind of maybe tricked and misled in some way.
Yes.
I wanted to also, of course, talk to you about the very important relief work you do, but also how it ties into resistance. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the society, the medical society, and how it does a certain kind of relief work that can be rightfully described as resistance, and how it might be different from the other kinds of NGOs that, whether they realize it or not, are not actually involved in resistance, or maybe involved in something that's more corporate or capitalist. But
well, there are two types of Palestinian non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations. You have those who are close to the people, who started as voluntary movements. They didn't start by getting funding from outside. And you have, of course, some kind of small NGOs that look like shops, running from one donor to another, looking for donation opportunities. No, what we are talking about here is related to the very simple fact, which is that at this moment, the number of Palestinians who stayed in Palestine, regardless of the fact that Israel displaced 7 million, what became 7 million refugees, 70% of the Palestinian population in 1948. Regardless of that, our numbers today in Palestine is 7.3 million versus 7.1 million Israeli Jewish people. So we are more than them. And that's exactly why Netanyahu wants to conduct ethnic cleansing, first in Gaza and then in the West Bank. In our strategy, staying in Palestine is the first most important factor to defy Israeli ethnic cleansing and to defy defeat that they try to impose on us. So anything that you do in Palestine to help people get medical care, or to help farmers farm their land, or to help the farmers whose olive trees are cut by Israeli illegal settlers or burned, or to help find jobs for workers, any help that is given to students to continue their education is all about resistance. So that's why we call it popular resistance. And in my opinion, the organization that I represent, Medical Relief, has been instrumental in helping the steadfastness of the Palestinian people. We work in 600 communities out of 660 communities in the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. At this very moment, our teams in Gaza, regardless of all the difficulties, we have 76 medical teams working in every spot in Gaza Strip. They help and treat more than 200,000 people every month in Gaza. In the city of Gaza, we take responsibility for following up the injured people. We take the responsibility of helping the 10,000 cancer patients. We take care of patients who cannot go anymore to the hospitals like Shifa Hospital that were destroyed by Israel. And so on and so forth. It's about community grassroots work to help the steadfastness of the people. And the closer you are to people and to their needs, the more you can do. Like, for instance, we have at least 15 mobile clinics now that work in the so-called Area C, where the Palestinian Authority is not there. I mean, it's according to Oslo Agreement, 62% of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is where the PA doesn't have any presence, neither security presence nor civil presence. And that's where these areas, these communities are attacked continuously by Israeli settlers who try to evict them. So we go and help them. We work with them. It's about empowering the people. It's about empowering the local communities to survive and to steadfast and to struggle for their rights.
Yes. I mean, do you feel that some other NGOs are, whether intentionally or not, are being, I'm not sure if it's too strong a word to say disservice, but by not joining in solidarity with the existing Palestinian groups that are already on the ground and are leading the movement, that they are kind of siphoning energy away from the collective will of the Palestinian people and self-determination?
I think you have to look at each organization separately. You can't generalize.
Right.
So I will look at any NGO or any organization and see what they do, what programs they conduct, how close they are to the people, what is the impact of their work. If it is an NGO that is serving only its own employees or leadership, then that's of course not going to be useful for Palestinians. If it's an NGO that doesn't follow a Palestinian strategy and Palestinian framework of their goals and just do what donors tell them to do, then of course that's not going to be helpful to the Palestinian people. So I think nobody should generalize. You have to look at each organization in its own merit and about what it does. But in general, I would say civil society is very vital for Palestinian people in all its structures.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Barghouti, for this very illuminating discussion. I'm just wondering, before we wrap up, if there's any, I mean, you've already said so much of value, if there's any final thoughts or observations that you'd like to share.
I would like just to say that we are now in a very difficult struggle. We're trying to survive. Our people are trying to survive in front of 3 war crimes that Israel is committing. The war crime of genocide, the war crime of collective punishment, including starving people, as they do now in the north, and the war crime of ethnic cleansing. And we have to stand up to them, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and everywhere. And I believe we will succeed in our struggle. But what we need more than anything else is now our internal unity. A unity that is based on clear understanding of the fact that we have to struggle for our rights. And we have to be self-dependent. We have to rely on ourselves. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe in our people. And I have no doubt whatsoever that eventually we will be successful and that we will defeat this injustice that we are subjected to. And in that sense, we are so thankful and appreciative to any solidarity that is coming from any country in the world.
Yes. Well, thank you so much again for being with me today, Dr. Barghouti, and I wish you, of course, all the very best with your exceptional work.
Thank you. Thank you.